was going to, oh, there we go. I forget those things. Thank you, Tom. That's why it's really nice to have somebody like Tom doing his side of the job that I don't have to worry about. I finished the book of Romans last week, and I was planning on moving on to the book of Philippians. The interesting thing about starting something new in the when a lot of people are gone is that you almost have to start it over again. So I'm gonna start with the early beginnings of Philippi, long before the letter was written. And let's go back to Acts chapter 16, where Paul is on his second missionary journey. And if you remember, he's working his way through Turkey and wants to go to Bithynia, which is off towards Europe, up into the Uristan or Yurkistan or whatever those stands are, all those different countries up into that area. And he was not allowed to do that. The scriptures tell us that the Holy Spirit forbade them from going that direction and sent them over to the town of Troas, which was on the western coast of Turkey. So if you think of the United States and Turkey, then we're talking about probably up in the Washington area where Seattle is or something like that is where Troas would be. And of course, right across the Aegean Sea from Troas is then going to get you into the upper Greek peninsula, and that's where they end up going and where Philippi is located. Chapter 16, verse 8 says, they ended up in Troas, and while there, Paul had a vision of a man from Macedonia standing before him and encouraging him to come over to that region and share the message of good news. Immediately, we looked for a way to cross over into Macedonia, knowing that it was God who was calling us to preach the good news to them. Now, Luke is the one who's writing this book. And Luke, we know from later information, is from the area of Macedonia. He's a doctor, a scholar of some sort. And it's just interesting that at verse 10 of chapter 16, right after Paul has this vision and runs into a man, the terminology, the pronoun of the book of Acts switches from he did this, he did this, he did this to we did this. And so it seems as though if the man Paul saw in his vision wasn't Luke, Luke joined them right there in Troas before they made the trip over. I have this picture, and I can't get it out of my mind, but I know it's extrapolating scripture a long distance away. But I have this picture that Paul goes to bed one night and he has this vision of a man in Troas who is saying, come over to Macedonia. And Paul gets up the next day and he goes into the marketplace and he finds himself face to face with this man that he just saw in his dream. And he says, who are you? And the guy says, Luke. And, they have this conversation. And Paul said, well, God is telling me that we're supposed to go over to Macedonia. And Luke said that'd be the greatest thing in the world to have you come over to Macedonia. I mean, I just sort of had this picture of it unfolding that way, rather than it being this impractical, well, not impractical, ethereal, I don't know what the best word is for it, where he has this dream and he decides, okay, let's go over to Macedonia. And there isn't anything happening in real life that makes that connect together. Because I've found a number of times when God gives us this hunch, this idea, this direction, that there's usually something physical that comes along with it. That we get up the next day and we see something that seems to be leading us down that path, This is the right thing for us at this particular point. We got some money from Linda's uncle one time. Not really sure why. Anyway, we got some money from him, and we needed a new car. And Linda and I were driving around Visalia in those days and saw this used car, and it was a big old Buick, those Oldsmobile, those big old station wagons. And we had 4 kids, and we were always hauling more than 4 kids with us wherever we went. And we said, that's it. That's what we need to spend this money on to buy our new car. And it was just clear that God was leading us in that direction. We need a new car. Here's the new car. And it worked out to be a fabulous car for us. And so it was one of those things where I can just see Paul having this dream and then meeting Luke, and Luke says, come over. And maybe he met Luke in the marketplace and he told him all about Jesus, and Luke said, I give my life to Christ, and my whole family back home needs that too. It might have been something going along that line, but something in my heart and my mind just tells me that there was an encounter between Paul and Luke, and Paul may have never known Luke before he had that dream and met him the next day. So speculation, I know. I'm just going to throw it all out there. But the scriptures tell us in the book of Joel, and this came up right after the incident of Pentecost in the book of Acts, that your young men will dream dreams and your old men will have visions, and we should be expecting that God would be speaking to us in these kinds of ways when he has this desire to nudge us in different directions. And so our hearts should be open, our minds should be open to that kind of leadership from God. I just, off the top of my head, remember the time when Elijah was in the cave and he kept expecting God to speak through the storm and speak through the wind and speak through something great and grand, and all of a sudden it was just this whisper that came to him where God spoke to him in a very quiet and simple way. And so I don't think God is always going to be flamboyant about it, but he's got this desire to help us walk in the right way. Listen for that. Verse 11, he says, we set out from Troas, sailing first to the island of Samothrace and then to the city of Neapolis and on to Philippi, which was a major city of Macedonia. Philippi was first founded in probably 350 BC and lasted until I think it was about 950 AD, and then it's there in ruins, but not as a city any longer. We stayed in that Roman colony for a number of days, Paul said. And when the Sabbath day came around, we went outside the city to a place by the river where we had been told there might be a gathering for prayer. And there we found some women who had assembled together and we started speaking with them. In those days, I don't know what the rules are now, but in those days, you couldn't have a synagogue, an official gathering of prayer, unless you had 10 men, okay, 10 Jewish men. Otherwise, it wasn't a legal synagogue, okay? It would be like saying we couldn't have a church unless we had 10 families and that sort of thing. The Presbyterian Church does that. If we were a new church development, we couldn't really become a church until we had like 75 members or something like that. There are all these rules about how to develop a church and that sort of thing. But we're a happy church, so we're going to just keep right on going. And they don't mind us keeping going. They just wouldn't add us to the list if we were coming to them right now, type of thing. But you need these 10 men back in those days to have a synagogue. But the women had created this house of prayer or place of prayer down by the river. And they gathered together for prayer and for worship. And Paul says, well, let's go down there and let's go talk to them. And I'm sure that he would be sharing with them about his knowledge of Jesus and the Messiah, and hope for heaven and all of those kinds of things. And I think that one of the things I can gain from this situation is the benefit that we gain when we come to church, and again, a lot of times we come to receive. We want to be with the other people. We want to sing the songs. We want to hear the message. We want to receive something from God when we come. But I think the other side of it is, and it's very important for us to keep in mind, that one of the reasons we come to church is to give. And we ought to open up our minds to think that way, that we have something to offer. Now, I'm not talking about offering. I'm talking about we have something to offer. Uh, where two or three are gathered, there I am in the presence, in their presence or in their midst, Jesus said. So if only two people gather, well, he'd be there too. But it's like the more people we have, I think the more we sense the presence of God. And not that we have to have lots of people, but we come to make a good experience for the people around us. We come because there's something that God has done in our lives that we can share with others. And as we share that with others, they benefit from it, just like we benefit when people share with us. And so there's a comfort, a feeling of good. There's a feeling of God's presence when we gather together. And I think we should come not just for what we can get, but for what we can give in the presence that we have. I was thinking about it. We use that phrase at the end of I do from time to time, at the end of the church service, where Aaron's blessing is given, and part of that blessing is, may the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And I keep thinking about what that countenance is, and something I thought of this week is you're walking down the street and you see somebody coming along, and you say hi to them, okay? Which, interestingly enough, doesn't happen very much anymore. Nobody seems to say hi anymore. It's like, oh, if I talk to you, I'm going to get COVID or something. I mean, that just seems to be what happened to COVID, is that people aren't as friendly as in the places where I am as they used to be. And so I think we need to change that. We need to be a little more bold about what we say. But there's a difference when somebody walks up and I say hi to them as they're walking past, or if I recognize them, it's usually hi. You know, that's the countenance, and that's what I'm looking for. When I come to God, He recognizes me, He loves me, and He welcomes me, and that's what I find here in this place. That old TV show about the bar in Boston, Cheers, where everybody was sitting around the bar. They were all happy when somebody walked in that they knew. They said hi when somebody walked in. They didn't know, but they were really happy. Oh, there's that. And it's that countenance that I bring to you, you bring to me, that countenance to make me feel like I belong here and that I'm welcomed here. And that's the kind of thing that is a benefit of being together on the Sabbath in whatever way we can be together. And thank God for the electronics that allows us to be together at a great distance as well. Verse 14, Lydia, a woman from Thyatira who sold purple fabrics and worshiped God, listened to what we had to say. The Lord touched her, and she responded to everything Paul spoke. She and her whole household believed and were baptized. And then she asked us, would you come stay at my house? and we could not say no to her. She was touched. Her life was changed because of her hearing the gospel, because of her responding to the gospel. Her life was changed. And when lives are changed, we start to become more, in my mind, more selfless than selfish. And we begin to be on a path that Jesus takes us on to become more of a servant than someone who needs to be served. And so she had a hunger for Jesus, a hunger for learning, a hunger for righteousness. I sat with a friend of mine this week that I've known for years, and we were talking about a number of things. But one of the things he said, when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I ask Jesus is, make me on fire today. And he's the kind of person, he's got a church, if you will, that's about 3 miles long. He leaves his house and he walks for 3 miles back to his house. And everybody he passes on the way becomes a part of his church. He stops and talks to them. He asks them how they're doing. He asks them if he could pray for them. He prays for them whether they want it or not. And he just right there in their face. And every now and then he said he's walking down the road, and somebody stops their car in the middle of the road. It's one of those roads that has 2 lanes and a middle lane. And they call him over to the middle of the road and they say, would you pray for me because this and this and this is happening? He's become their pastor of all the people in the shops and who walk along that road and are down there. That's become his church, and he's their pastor. And he says, God, make me on fire today. Give me a hunger to know Jesus. I guess our prayer, if I end it right there, is, may I see the leading of Jesus more clearly this week. May I arrive at worship next week with something to offer the people around me. And may I seek to be on fire for my Lord. Let's